This was something I've been dying to do for ages, and when the opportunity finally came, I grabbed it without a second thought. If I had known the place was actually open to the public, that you could pay for a guided tour or even wander the ground yourself, I would have gotten myself ready much sooner. And trust me, the place is huge. I made a reservation, packed my gear, and set off. A friendly guide greeted me when I arrived. I told him I was a horror novelist and a former corrections officer, so I was interested in both the old and new sections of the prison. He was incredibly helpful, pointing out a route that would fit my interests and marking spots on a map for good photos. After I planned my itinerary, he had me sign a check-in sheet, which had a space left blank for checking out. "Do you get people who go missing?" I joked. He laughed, but it was a smile that seemed more nervous than genuine. "Oh, you'd be surprised." I nodded my thanks and was about to leave when he added a warning, his face suddenly turning pale. "Those buildings marked in black, don't go in them. Don't even get close." "Why not?" I asked. He hesitated, his voice catching slightly. "You don't want to know. Just, they're dangerous." I didn't press him. With a sense of unease, I began my tour. The first building took me by surprise. It didn't look like a prison at all. It was more like a French-style cottage, with stone walls that looked new enough to stand for another 100 years. I took out my camera and my phone, the phone for normal pictures, the camera set to a mode that would produce a more sinister effect. Outside, the sky was clear and the sun was bright, making the building look bright and welcoming. I fiddled with my camera settings, trying to make it look like a haunted house. Stepping inside, I was instantly cut off from the blazing sun. The interior reminded me of a ballroom. Beyond the entryway was a vast room with a brick floor. A stone archway on one wall bizarrely led to a dead end. I couldn't tell if it was decorative or if it once led somewhere that was now sealed off. I turned and faced a series of dark hallways, exactly what I came here to explore. I left the main hall and moved slowly down a corridor, taking pictures. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the interior, but also revealing years of decay. The hallway was lined with brand new iron doors, each with a small glass window. But nearly every pane of glass had been shattered. Vandalism, or something else? I felt a knot of unease in my stomach. I came to a cell with cage-like bars on the door, the first real confirmation that this building was in fact a prison. Inside, there was nothing but peeling paint, no bed, nothing. It didn't seem like a cell designed for long-term inmates. At the end of the hall was a fork, a staircase leading up and another leading down. I decided to go up first, hoping to get a view of the entire ground from a higher vantage point. I gripped the handrail, half expecting it to break off in my hand. To my surprise, it was sturdy, though a cloud of dust fell from it. I stared at the dust on my hand, wondering how long it had been sitting there, just waiting for me to disturb it. The upper floors were in even worse shape, more dilapidated and desolate. In one room, a ceiling fan hung with its blades drooping as if they'd been melted. I chuckled to myself, suddenly aware of how empty the building was, how utterly alone I was. An echo sounded from all around me, but it wasn't my own voice. I brushed off the echo, chalking it up to acoustics, and pushed forward. At the end of the hall was a staircase leading down, its entrance blocked by a metal gate. My guide had been very clear. There were 2 rules I had to follow: don't open any closed doors, and more importantly, don't close any open ones. When I'd asked him why, he'd hesitated before giving me a nervous smile and saying, because we might not have the key for that door, and it could take a long time to get it open. With his words in my head, I went down the stairs, passing the floors I'd already seen, and descended into the basement. A musty, rotting smell hit me. The air was cool, a welcome relief from the 90-degree heat outside, but the stench of decay was still nauseating. The rooms in the basement were in even worse condition. Hardly a single spot on the ceiling was intact, and the few remaining patches of paint on the walls were peeling and flaking under the pull of gravity. Light was scarce, as there were very few windows. I turned a corner and was plunged into absolute darkness. My throat tightened as I fumbled for my flashlight. Light was supposed to bring a sense of security, but the small beams seemed to be swallowed by the surrounding darkness, as if the shadows were closing in, ready to extinguish it at any moment. I took a few cautious steps into the darkened hallway. Suddenly, my light fell on a word scrawled on the wall in jarring red letters. Help. There was no way to know if it was a leftover from when the prison was active or just graffiti from some prankster. It was even less clear if the help was a plea or a warning. Either way, my stomach clenched. I moved on, leaving the cryptic message behind. As I walked, a cool breeze brushed past me. I turned to see a long, lightless corridor lined with pipes. Checking my map, I saw that this building had a tunnel, but the map didn't show where it led. I felt like I'd seen enough of this building, so I decided to follow the tunnel. The air was thick with the smell of damp mold, and the peeling coating on the low ceiling was disgusting. The ceiling was lower here than elsewhere, and as I walked, the space seemed to shrink. I had to stoop slightly, afraid of hitting my head on the gross, cracked surface. I hoped the tunnel wouldn't get any smaller and trap me. So far, I'd only seen 3 other people, 2 who were taking a different route, and 1 who was just leaving this building as I entered. I walked into the tunnel alone, the silence almost suffocating. With every step I took, the echo rolled through the hollow passage. Several times, I thought someone was following me. I'd stop, whip around, and scan the path behind me with my flashlight, but there was never anyone there. Despite my unease, curiosity drove me forward. If I'd been timing it, I guess I was only in the tunnel for about 15 minutes. But being alone in the dark with only a weak beam of light for company, that time felt impossibly long. Along the way, I saw a few side rooms and other branching paths, but I chose to stick to the main tunnel. I kept walking, and soon a thin line of light appeared ahead. A long sigh of relief escaped me, the literal light at the end of the tunnel. Just as I was savoring the feeling of anticipation, I heard a distinct sound from behind me. It was definitely not the echo of my footsteps, because I was standing still. It sounded like someone had dropped a rock. I immediately swept my flashlight beam back into the depths of the tunnel, but I saw nothing. The rock was gone too. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I turned and quickened my pace, hurrying toward the light. Soon, the tunnel exit came into view. I'd emerged into a laundry room, the last place I expected to find. The industrial washers and dryers all had their glass windows smashed. The room was bright and clean. The view outside was stunning. I stepped out of the laundry room and into the scorching, blinding sunlight, relieved. But the feeling didn't last long. Sweat quickly soaked my back. I stopped to take a long drink from my water bottle. Looking around, I realized I was in a completely unfamiliar area. I put my water bottle away and pulled out the map. By carefully comparing the shapes of the surrounding buildings, I realized I'd somehow walked from the southern edge of the property all the way to the northern end. I shook my head in disbelief, then started deciding which building to enter next. The cafeteria was on my left. I needed footage from my current supernatural novel, so I went inside without hesitation. But what I found was a far cry from what I'd expected. I thought I'd see rows of tables, but the place was completely empty. I turned and headed for the kitchen, surprised to find the smell of grease still hanging in the air, as if the ghosts of 1,000 past meals were still lingering. Continuing down the hall, I heard faint voices and figured it must be other explorers. Finally, I arrived at the place I was most excited about, T Block. It had cell blocks and, more importantly, a recreation yard. I couldn't wait to get some photos to spice up my book. The fence around the T Block yard was unique. The bottom half was chain link, but the top was clear polycarbonate to stop inmates from climbing it. The very top was lined with sharp razor wire. The whole space was no more than 5 feet wide and 15 feet long. I tried to imagine how unbearable it would be if this was my only time outdoors. As I was lost in thought, I heard a door slam shut with a loud bang. I froze, waiting for other explorers to appear, but the area remained dead silent. I cautiously left the rec yard and entered T Block itself. Here, all the cell doors were open except for one. I racked my brain, trying to remember if that door had been open when I first came in, but I couldn't be sure. A story from the prison's official website came to mind. 2 infamous serial killers had been housed here, and both had died in custody. I tried to recall if one of them had died in T Block, but then decided I didn't want to know the answer. After snapping a few pictures of the block, I left, probably faster than I'd intended. The next building looked like a dormitory for low-security inmates. A hallway was flanked by rooms with no bars on the doors or windows. As I walked, I saw a gray box on the floor with a flashing red light. I got closer and saw a man and a woman inside, surrounded by a mountain of equipment, monitors, cameras, microphones, you name it. Thinking I'd stumbled onto a TV show taping, I quickly apologized and left the building. Across from this building was the chapel. I went in, took some photos, then went down to the basement where I found another tunnel. Not wanting to get lost again, I quickly came back out and returned to the main building to chat with the guides. They laughed when I told them about getting lost in the tunnel, but they looked completely baffled when I mentioned the man and woman with the equipment. They said there were no film crews scheduled for that day, and they couldn't recall anyone coming in with that much gear. I was confused. Was this a joke? A misunderstanding? Or was something else going on? A guide told me that building was a favorite spot for paranormal investigators. I didn't ask any more questions. Instead, I asked about other buildings I hadn't visited yet. They pointed out the modern cell blocks, the building with the medical facilities, and the morgue. These were all on the same route. I thanked them and set off again. The first place I went to was a newer cell block, D Block. This building was about 30 years old and had been the prototype for a new type of prison in the state. Stepping inside, I felt a wave of comfort. Its modern design reminded me of the prison I used to work at, just on a much larger scale. The whole building was a massive triangle, with a day room situated in the center of each row of cells. I took a lot of photos of both the general area and the inside of the cells. Strangely, all the tables and chairs in the day room had been removed. Even weirder, the toilets and sinks in every single cell were gone. I found that particularly odd. Who would go to the trouble of removing all the toilets from an abandoned prison? As I was busy taking pictures, 2 other explorers entered the block. I said hello, and we chatted about what we'd seen. One of them also worked at a state prison, so it was nice to talk with someone who knew the ins and outs of prison life. After they left, I moved to the other side of the building. It was a mirror image of the first side, but walking into it felt like stepping into another dimension. The air felt heavy, as if it were being pressed down by something unseen. With a growing sense of dread, I moved forward cautiously. This side also had 2 skylights, but the light was so dim I had to pull out my flashlight to see into the corners the light couldn't reach. I tried to suppress my rising fear, reminding myself I was only here for one reason: to take pictures. I found a relatively clean cell and took a few shots. Wanting a different angle, I stepped inside a cell to shoot looking out. When I glanced up at the window, I noticed the sky was much darker than when I'd first entered the building. Suddenly, I heard a faint creak. I turned my head and couldn't believe what I was seeing. The door to my cell was slowly closing. My mind went blank. Was I dreaming? There was no one else here but me. The door continued to swing shut. The guide's warning flashed through my mind. They didn't have keys for every door, which is why the rule was to never close any of them. I lunged for the doorway, jamming my foot in the frame. The door slammed into my foot with enough force to make me nearly pass out. I yanked my foot back in pain. Shaking all over, I shoved the door open with all my might. It slammed back against the wall with a crash. I sprinted out of the cell and spun around, looking for a prankster, but the day room was empty. I ran to the 3 cells on either side of me, searching for anyone who might be hiding, but there was no one. A cold sweat soaked through my shirt. I suddenly understood what the missing toilets meant, and I knew I had to get out of this building fast. I raced to the main entrance, only to find the door shut tight. I pulled with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. There were no tools around to pry it open. I looked toward the door on the other side of the block and saw that it too was closed. A wave of helplessness washed over me, so thick it was almost suffocating. Then, a memory from earlier that day flashed in my mind. Besides the main entrance, this building had a side door that had been open. My heart pounded. I turned and ran back into the building, feeling as if someone was chasing me. When I reached the side door, it was closed, but I didn't hesitate. I slammed my shoulder into it, and with a creak, it swung open. I wasn't prepared for what was on the other side. A set of 5 concrete steps led down to a small path. I bolted down the steps, ran into a patch of knee-high grass, and fell hard next to a tree. As I lay there, I didn't care about the pain. All that mattered was that I had escaped the building that was trying to trap me. I lay on the ground and looked up at the sky. When I'd entered the building, it had been sunny and nearly 90 degrees. Now, the sky was filled with dark clouds, not a ray of sunlight to be seen. It was as if twilight had come hours early. I knew I couldn't have been in there for more than 20 or 30 minutes. I checked the timestamp on my phone's photos. From the first picture I took inside to now, exactly 28 minutes had passed. So how did the sky get so dark so fast? I pushed the question to the back of my mind and focused on getting as far away from that building as I could. I pushed through the tall grass toward the asphalt road that cut through the middle of the campus and ran straight for the main building. After all the confusion and getting lost, I was finally back on the path to the main building. I looked back at the block I just escaped. It looked as ordinary and harmless as ever, but the gloomy sky made everything seem sinister. Of course, that feeling was probably amplified by the terror of almost being trapped. Safely outside, my mood improved instantly, filled with the joy of being free again. I debated with myself whether to continue to the next building or just call it a day. I already had plenty of great photos, so it wouldn't be a failure to leave now. As I was hesitating, I noticed a man in the window of a nearby building, watching me. I hadn't seen him before, but this place was so big, it wasn't surprising that I hadn't run into everyone. I smiled and gave him a wave. He didn't respond, just kept staring at me. His coldness made up my mind for me. I would go to the last building on my list, partly to get away from my new friend. This was the building I was most excited for. It was the old morgue, and the creepiness factor was off the charts. I went inside and explored the first floor, which had a few examination tables and patient chairs. Taking a few pictures there felt like a good way to round out my expedition. Next up was the morgue itself. I went downstairs and followed a hallway to the end. I expected to find an empty room, but instead I saw a group of people, maybe a dozen or so, crowded around something, craning their necks to get a better look. I peered over, but the crowd blocked my view and muffled their voices, so I couldn't make out what they were saying. I found an old chair, dragged it to the front, and climbed on top to see what was happening. When I saw the scene before me, I almost threw up. Oh my God, a man in a blood-spattered white lab coat was performing a real autopsy. On the operating table lay a woman in a green top and white shorts. Her exposed chest and open ribcage made her identity clear. In his hand, the man held a beating heart. The moment the words left my mouth, everyone, including the man in the white coat, stopped and turned to stare at me. This wasn't the kind of look you get for talking in a church or a library. This was a deeper, more sinister stare. I tried to jump down from the chair, but my brain and body felt disconnected. My mind was still trying to process the horrific scene, while my body was screaming at me to run. Just as the crowd reached for me in unison, I snapped back to reality and bolted. I sprinted down the hallway, not even daring to look back to see if they were chasing me. I took the stairs two at a time, nearly tripping, and finally burst out the door. Breathing in the fresh air, my panic eased slightly, but I didn't stop running. I had to get out of here. I ran toward the path, but skidded to a halt. The man who had been watching me from the window was now standing in my way. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there staring at me, but I desperately wanted to avoid him. I quickly veered onto another path, trying my best not to let my backpack fall off. At the next corner, I saw him again, standing there, blocking my path. Impossible. How could he have gotten here so fast? Even weirder, he was standing perfectly still, as if he'd been waiting for me, not even breathing hard. Panic drove me toward another path, the only one left that led to the main building. But there he was again, blocking the middle of the road. I stopped to catch my breath, but he remained motionless. I glanced back and saw the people from the morgue chasing after me. This was my last chance. I ran straight at the man. He didn't move. I braced my shoulder to slam into him. But the moment I made contact, I hit nothing but air. A chill ran through me as I passed through the spot where he had been standing. I almost fell, but I quickly regained my balance and kept running. In my peripheral vision, I saw the people from the morgue splitting up, taking different paths to try and cut me off. I kept my eyes fixed on the main building. That was my salvation. I ran with everything I had, a desperate sprint for my life, like I was crossing the finish line of a race between life and death. I burst into the main building, my mind a chaotic mess. I didn't know what to say to the guides. Should I yell at them for this deadly game, or warn them to run for their lives? But fate had already made the choice for me. The reception area was empty. Not just that, the entire prison felt abandoned. I picked up the map they had given me that morning, and it crumbled in my hand like old parchment. As I stood there, dazed, I heard the back door creak. I panicked and ran out the front door toward the parking lot. The parking lot was empty, except for my car. Less than 5 hours ago, there had been more than a dozen cars parked here. Now, there wasn't a single one. It was another unanswered puzzle, but I had no time to think about it. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped away from that place as fast as I could. I didn't slow down until I was miles away, finally returning to the speed limit. On the way home, everything felt different. My house still looked like my house, but it felt completely wrong. The feeling of being watched, an unshakable tension, followed me day after day. A few days passed, and I was still trying to make sense of what had happened. I searched online for the prison's website, but it was gone, as if it had never existed. I worked up the courage to drive by the area several times, just to confirm it was still there. I knew it wasn't a hallucination. I still had the pictures on my phone as proof. I posted online, asking if anyone knew about this old prison or had experienced anything strange there, but I got no replies. I uploaded the photos to social media, asking if anyone had ever been there, but I didn't get a single view. I don't know if anyone will ever see this, but I have to post it as a warning to at least tell people to be very careful if they go to that prison, if it even still exists. This morning, I finally got a reply. The person wouldn't reveal their identity. They just left one message: go back the way you came. It took me a long time to understand what that mysterious message meant. It took even longer to face my fear and accept the truth. I didn't want to go back, but I knew I didn't belong here. I packed my gear, mustered my courage, and started the journey back to the prison. When I arrived, the place was still deserted. I pulled out my map and mentally marked the fastest route to D Block. I tried to be as quiet as possible, slipping into the main building and then out the back door into the prison grounds. I scanned my surroundings to make sure no one was lurking, then started moving in a straight line toward D Block. The light was fading, and the evening shadows helped conceal me. I was about halfway there when the man suddenly appeared in front of me. I tried to use the same trick as last time and just run through him, but he was ready. As I passed through him, he grabbed my backpack and yanked me backward, bringing me to a dead stop. He dragged me into T Block and threw me into a cell. For a long time, he just sat there, staring at me. I huddled in a corner of the bunk, fighting to stay awake. Suddenly, I heard a tapping sound from another cell. I jumped up and ran to the cell door. Is someone there? I yelled. Are you trapped too? A voice replied, that depends. Depends on what? I asked. Are you human, or one of them? The person chuckled. I'm human. I think I got pulled over when I was in D Block. I asked. Wait, are you the prison guard I was talking to earlier? Yes. You got pulled over too? Pretty much. What about your friend? We got separated. I haven't seen her. My heart sank. I asked what she was wearing. A light green top and white shorts. I hung my head. I know where she is, I said sadly. Where? She asked. The morgue. They were doing an autopsy on her. The air grew heavy, broken only by a few quiet sobs. Are you sure she was wearing those clothes? Positive. Then I don't want to hear anymore. We were silent for a long time. Finally, she spoke. I never asked your name. I'm Mike. You. Celia. Nice to meet you. You too. I just hope this isn't where it ends for us. Well, at least it took them a while to find you. I was already off the prison grounds. Then why did you come back? I told her about the disappearing website and the mysterious message. I think we're not in our own world, I said, and the only way back is through D Block. Wow, she said. That's a lot to take in. I have a plan, I said. Have they given you any food? Yeah, 3 times a day, just like a real prison. I'm wondering if those people are guards, trapped here just like us. Probably, she said, but they should be coming soon. They're never late. I hope your plan works, she said. I'm ready to go whenever. About an hour later, the food slot on my cell door opened and a sandwich was pushed through. The man gave me a glance, then left. 5 minutes later, I pulled a thin metal wedge from my bag, one end wrapped in tape. I placed it against the lock on my cell door, took out a hammer, and hit it hard. The lock popped open. As quietly as I could, I went to Celia's cell and passed her the wedge and hammer. Soon, she was free too. She handed the tools back, and we started moving toward D block, sticking to the shadows. As we neared the main entrance, something felt wrong. I tried pushing the door, and it opened easily. "I don't think this is the right way," I said, holding the door frame. "Is there another way?" "Go back the way you came, right?" she said. "This is the way we came, but I don't think it's the right one." I got out through the side door. I said, "We should go that way." I started toward the side door, but she blocked my path. "That's not the right way," she said. "All right, we'll try your way," I said, backing slowly toward the front door and following her inside. "How'd you get trapped?" she asked. "After I met you and your friend on the left side of the block, I went to the right side. The moment I stepped in, it felt different. The portal must be here in the main reception area," she said, looking around and stretching her arms out as if trying to grasp some invisible thread. "Doesn't seem to be working," she said with a frown. "I have another theory," I said. "Follow me." We went back to the left side of the block. "This is the cell where it happened," I said, stepping inside and feeling the wall near the door. Suddenly, I lunged out of the cell and slammed the door shut, locking her inside. "What are you doing?" she asked, shocked. "Surprise," I said. "Wait here. I'll be right back." I went around the front and to the side door I had escaped from. I pulled it gently and it opened. Stepping inside, a suffocating presence hit me. The air was so heavy it was hard to breathe. Without hesitation, I ran for the door. Just as I got there, Celia suddenly appeared in front of it. "How'd you get here?" I asked. Her eyes gleamed with betrayal. "No thanks to you." I pushed past her and yanked on the door handle. It was locked. "How did you get in?" I asked. The door locked behind me. "Help me open it." We both pulled on the door until we were out of breath. "Are there any other exits?" she asked. "I don't know. What about the other side door?" I asked. "It was open. Go see if it's locked." She ran to the other end. I pulled out my hammer and wedge, placed it against the bolt, and started hammering. The first time failed. I hit it again and again, my desperation growing. "What are you doing?" Celia's voice was suddenly right by my ear. I spun around. She was standing next to me. "I'm trying the same thing that worked in T-Block." "It won't work this time," she said with a small smile. "This door is different." "I know," I said, "just like I know you're not who you say you are." "What do you mean?" "It was you all along. You closed the door. You trapped me on the other side of the block. You were trying to trap me in that cell. You already dragged one victim to the morgue. I was just an accident you stumbled upon. You thought I'd panic and waste time trying to open the door, giving you time to come back and get me. But you didn't expect me to escape." The smile on her face stretched into a grotesque grin, splitting from ear to ear. Her eyes were empty, like bottomless pits. "You're right," she said, her voice suddenly a chorus of sinister, overlapping whispers. "I didn't expect you to escape. I certainly didn't expect you to go deeper. But now I'm back, and you're still going to stay here." She cackled, a harsh and grating sound. "You're not getting out of here, unless it's to the morgue." She snatched the hammer from my hand. "But what you didn't expect," I started. "What?" "Is that I already opened the door." I yanked the door, and it swung open, letting in a blast of cold wind. She swung the hammer at my head. I ducked just in time, lunged through the doorway, and slammed the door shut behind me. She pounded on the door, her screams deafening. I had to cover my ears, but her shrieks seemed to grow more and more distant, as if they were coming from far away. I stood on the other side of the door, watching the helpless fury flood her eyes. She reached her hand through the crack in the door and grabbed my wrist, trying to pull me back with all her might. I panicked, fighting against her unnatural strength, but she held me tight. My hand was slowly pulled closer to the door. When my fingers touched the frame, her hand was suddenly unable to pass through. I watched as she tried again and again, but she couldn't cross the threshold. I smiled at her. "This only works when I'm willing, doesn't it? You can't take me back against my will." She stared at my hand, her face twisting into a monstrous snarl, her teeth becoming sharp fangs. "Well then, I'll be going," I said calmly, watching her grip on my wrist. She became calm, her face expressionless, the anger seeming to fade. "I can't force you to go back," she said coldly, "but I will leave you with a little gift." She squeezed my wrist with incredible force. I felt the bones snap and cried out in pain. Suddenly, I was free. I looked down at my twisted, bruised wrist, then looked back up at her. She was staring at me with a triumphant smile. I backed away, out of her reach, then held up my good hand and gave her the finger. She chuckled and stepped back from the door. I walked out of the dark building and into the bright sunlight, trying to get as far away from that place as possible before collapsing on the ground from the pain. I got the first aid kit from my backpack and made a crude splint for my wrist. Walking toward the main building, I flinched at every shadow, my head swiveling back and forth. When I entered the main building, I saw the guide from last week. His eyes went wide. I collapsed onto a bench, trying not to touch my injured wrist. You came back," the guide said, stunned. I gave him a bitter smile. "Took a bit of a detour. Were you on the tour by yourself this time?" "No, not like that other day. There were quite a few people. So where did all the customers go?" I took a sip of water. "We only run tours on the weekend. Do you know what date it is?" "Wednesday." "Wednesday," I repeated, trying to process the fact that I had been trapped for 5 days. "What on earth happened?" the guide asked. I laughed. "It's a long story." "No, I mean your wrist," he said, pointing at me. I lifted my arm and looked at the injury. "A souvenir, I guess." After finishing my water, I struggled to my feet. "I'd like to go home now." "Of course. Just sign the checkout sheet." He handed me a clipboard with the sign-out forms. Flipping through them, I noticed a lot of blank spaces on the other side of the form. "How many people have you lost?" I asked. The guide was silent for a moment. "I'm not at liberty to say." I found my name and signed out. A few lines above my name was a woman's name, with the checkout signature blank. I guess that's where Celia would have signed. I turned to leave and heard him mutter behind me, "You're the only one who's come back." I looked back at him, but he pretended he hadn't said anything. Walking out of the building, the bright sun forced me to shield my eyes. My car was still there, along with 5 others. I didn't know which one belonged to the woman who would never be coming back. I'm posting this story as a warning. Some places are abandoned for a reason.